Hello there, welcome to the Saroy channel. I'm so delighted you've joined me this evening. It's so wonderful to have you tuning in with us tonight. Wherever you are in North America or the rest of the world, you are so welcome to our channel. And if you haven't subscribed, please do so, because I have got the most incredible stories lined up for you that you don't want to miss out on. And if you're the kind of person that really enjoys good entertainment, then this is the channel you should be tuning into. And as for my subscribers, I just want to send you my incredible love for all your ongoing support and encouragement. You guys are utterly amazing. I love you so very much, and that really is genuinely true. And before we start, I want to tell you that the story tonight is of a slightly different direction than the Bigfoot. We are going to be talking about Mothman, and I wonder how many of you are pondering whether this creature could be real. The question is asked by so many around this world of ours, where there have been so many humanoid sightings of winged creatures, and especially in the Mount Pleasant area and around Braxton County, where there have been so many incredible encounters with this creature. So I've got a wonderful story for you tonight from a newspaper reporter at the time who was reporting all this exciting phenomenon. So let's get started. I know you're going to enjoy the story. Dear Sarah, in 1967, I was living in my first little house, a cute little bungalow near the town of Mount Pleasant, and I did a number of reports on the various sightings of a creature known as Mothman that were seen in and around the area. I was a young girl at the time, working for a newspaper as a trainee reporter, hoping to become a fully fledged journalist one day. At the time, I was doing most of the menial junior tasks in the office. However, one of the journalists asked me to go out to visit the various individuals who claimed to have had sightings of the strange, monstrous bird-like creature. It was clear that the sightings of this winged beast had sent waves of dread around the whole community of Mount Pleasant and the surrounding areas. Little did I know at the time that I would also end up having a harrowing encounter with the feathery beast myself that would leave me with ultimately more questions than answers. The very large question around the town at the time was, what on earth was this thing? People had so many different ideas as to what it could be. Some people believed it was just a case of misidentification, and that the witnesses that had encountered this creature had mistaken it, and it really was just a sandhill crane or even an owl-like creature. However, my research clearly differed, as the people I questioned were adamant about what they had seen and were clearly traumatized by the harrowing ordeal that even months after the event left them shaking and trembling in their boots. Even though the witness descriptions differed from each other from time to time, maybe because this winged creature could possibly have shape-shifting capabilities, the general consensus, however, of opinion was that this bipedal bird-like creature was between 6 to 9 feet tall, with a very low slung head, giant-like black wings, and hypnotic glowing red eyes. One witness was to describe the red colour of those eyes as not of this world. I was so thrilled as a junior trainee to be doing all this interesting research for the small little newspaper which I worked for, which for me was the most exciting thing to do, so much better than the usual boring political stories and scandals I was so used to writing about that were so much less interesting. Many of the physical sightings of Mothman did happen around the time of the Silver Bridge collapse, and many people believe that the sighting of this bird-like monster before the terrible accident was a harbinger of doom and a clear warning of the impending dreadful fate soon to strike the town and almost tear the fabric of the community wide apart. On the day of the Silver Bridge collapse, it was rush hour with bumper-to-bumper traffic, and it was a freezing, icy cold day very close to Christmas. It was at 5 p.m. on the 15th of December 1967 when this imposing, statuesque landmark of the Silver Bridge that majestically graced the Ohio River since the dawn of its construction in 1928 was suddenly shaken to its core in a matter of seconds, and cars and people on the bridge were flung into the watery depths of this vicious, icy and cold grave. Sadly, about 46 people that day were to lose their lives. It was a horrendous day, and it was with stoic resignation that the people of Mount Pleasant faced the dreadful reality of having to come to terms with this heinous and despicable tragedy. Most people in the town knew of someone on that bridge who had so sadly lost their lives on that bitterly cold day in mid-November that was never to be forgotten. I interviewed a young couple who had a sighting of the Mothman that had many tongues wagging as to the strange origins of this curious creature. The couple claimed to have been parked on a farmer's field and were enjoying the view of the glorious Milky Way and pointing out various stars in the night sky. It was such a beautiful, tranquil night, and the couple were enjoying the serene moment of magical intimacy they were sharing together, when very suddenly the female occupant in the car noticed a light on the right-hand side. This light finally flooded the car with an intense brightness that was almost surreal. In shock, the couple revved up the engine and drove away from the scene as fast as they could, but a large metallic disc dotted with yellow downlighters on its rim hovered in the sky behind them, and the female occupant of the car was to see a tall, winged, humanoid-looking creature with wings extended backwards flying under the craft. She was to declare that this was one of the most terrifying, surreal moments of her entire young life, a moment that she would never forget. This posed a very interesting question. Was the Mothman of extraterrestrial origin and working in allegiance with this metallic disc? Many thought this to be a high probability and were sure that the Mothman did not come from our world. Some have suggested that our world has metaphysical openings like little windows or open portals in our outer atmosphere that allow otherworldly beings to slip in and out of our reality. Then there were others who believe that the Mothman is an interdimensional being, while some suggest he may indeed be a supernatural entity or even a fallen angel from the demonic realm of hell itself. Over and over again, during my research, I was to hear of all manner of encounters, too many of them to tell you about right now. People had seen this feathery beast, and many were terrified of the implications and dreadful omens the sighting for them imposed, and they were fearful that this harbinger of doom was either predicting their own imminent demise or was a messenger of impending disaster that would ultimately affect their lives one day in the future. My experience with the Mothman happened when I was meeting a gentleman at night in the TMT area, which consists of 36 acres of natural wilderness, which houses an abandoned military installation used in the World War to house explosive materials and perform various experiments, often with chemicals. Many believe that Mothman resided in this abandoned location, and the client I was to meet had seen a sighting of him at night beside a large abandoned power plant-like structure in the vicinity. "Perhaps I was crazy calling you out at night like this," he said to me, "because if I ever see this thing again, it will be way too soon." I could see how edgy and frightened this poor man was. "So your encounter happened around this time?" I asked him. "It was at exactly 10:30. "What did it look like?" I asked. "It was huge. Must have been at least 9 feet tall and definitely not less. It was a humanoid. It had visible arms and legs, but was covered almost in like this downy, feathery looking stuff, and had a low head, very much like an owl, with the hugest red compound-like eyes that I have ever seen. and of course the most massive wingspan, so much larger than a crane or even a huge vulture. Those wings were humongous, I remember that, and boy did they flap, and the sound that they made was terrifying. So did the creature see you, I asked. Oh yes, it did, and those eyes went right through me, almost like this thing could look through my whole life, future, present and past, like a neat filing system, and it could even read my thoughts. It definitely had a physical energy about it that was palpable, almost like currents of electricity that go through you, because you could physically feel it. Wow, that's such an interesting story, I said. So you saw him right here, and what was he doing? I was driving along past this facility, and I saw it standing up on the building, and it got my attention straight away because it was an imposing creature, to be sure. It jumped off that building like it was jumping off a diving board into the water, only in this case it was diving into the air. And then it started to fly and follow me as I drove along, and the look it gave me through my car window turned my blood freezing cold. I thanked the gentleman and scribbled down some notes quickly, and then I watched him drive away. Poor man, I thought. He really had a harrowing ordeal with the Mothman. I got into my car, closed the door behind me, and climbed into the driving seat, placing all my reports on the opposite seat. It was getting late, and it had been a long, drawn-out day. I had not eaten anything, and hunger had finally set in, and I was looking so forward to finally getting home, putting my feet up, and having a long soak in a hot bubble bath before finally retiring to bed. I was envisaging all this when I heard the thunderous sounds of heavy wings slapping against my car, causing it to shudder and vibrate. I glanced out of my side window to see this large, shadowy black form gliding way too close to my car for comfort. And then finally it lifted higher into the air like a plane taking off until it was 20 feet high in the air. The creature was in full flight with imposing wings set back like a butterfly, and it flew with incredible grace, almost like an angel. It swiveled its head round like an owl does in my direction, and I found myself staring into those hypnotic red eyes, and they were so terrifying. It was like they went like X-ray vision going right through me, but it was a physical, electrical, palpable feeling that I cannot explain. All I can say is that this creature had a very demanding, formidable presence that was not of this world. I pressed down my accelerator hard and raced home as fast as I could, and I was praying that this creature was not following me. Oh dear God, I begged, please don't let it be following me. Oh God, I prayed, please, I beg you, beg you, beg you. I'll do anything, but don't let it follow me. And I'm glad to say that it did not. But my evening was spent in a terribly anxious and confused state of deep contemplation, wondering what on earth this Mothman creature meant, and whether it imposed a long-term threat over my life. Would I be one of those people that just suddenly died in precariously peculiar situations? I did not know. I was so afraid. It was not long before our newspaper was printing stories about strange UFO sightings, bizarre orbs and lights that were seen around the area and in other parts of West Virginia, and of course sightings of the Mothman himself. One day at home I opened the door to a very skinny, pale-faced man, wearing a very dark suit, shiny black shoes, a very large bowler hat, and dark wraparound glasses that appeared to be concealing a pair of bulging eyes. I did suggest he removed his glasses, as it was dark in my home, but he insisted on keeping them on, much to my surprise. There was something off and outer-worldly about the presence of this man. I cannot put my finger on it, but he did not seem entirely human. I beckoned for him to sit on one of my large, comfortable couches, and he sat down reluctantly, sitting at the edge with his legs unusually straight and his chest unnaturally erect. And then he looked at me and said, "All these UFO reports and commentary about the Mothman has been a great concern to us, a very grave concern indeed. We are very concerned about all these UFO reports and sightings of this so-called Mothman." "A concern for who?" I asked, looking floored. "The people in the area are just loving all the stories we're writing about the creature, and they cannot get enough of it. It's all over the place. People are loving it. Why should it concern you?" "Put it this way, I would strongly advise that you stop filing all these reports, because if you don't do this as I say, the repercussions could be of great significance to you, and I would not want to be in your shoes should that be the case." At that point, he got up and walked away, and I really sensed that I had been deeply threatened and was to keep my mouth shut, which is what I did for many long years and continue to do so right now, and one of the reasons why I have chosen to remain anonymous in this forum of yours. It would seem visitations by these strange men in black were common in our area, in Point Pleasant and all around West Virginia, and the message was the same: shut up or ship out. It really seemed like these men were of extraterrestrial origin, and the feeling was that they were potentially extremely dangerous and not to be messed with, and that feeling among many was unanimous. You may wonder what my own impression of Mothman is, as many have invariably asked me that very same question, despite of course having their own set of views on the creature. I believe he has extraterrestrial origins and is connected with UFOs and men in black. I think they are outer-worldly and can slip in and out of our reality, maybe through the envelopes over our world. Whether I'm right or wrong about the mysterious Mothman is irrelevant, but one thing is certain: he is definitely real, and he is out there, and seemingly as physical as you and me, although nobody has ever been able to strike him down, which does suggest he may be supernatural. Where he comes from and what he's doing on our planet and in our world is a question I could not answer and wish I could. Some of these humanoid creatures around the world seem very territorial and tend to be around various places, like the Owlman that is often seen in Cornwall, England. And there are of course Mothman sightings in West Virginia and even in Houston, Texas. And there's been sightings of the creature in Chernobyl in Russia, a site of a great disaster. Every year in the town of Mount Pleasant, there is a Mothman festival, where the town is filled with so many people that are so excited and very thrilled to be there. It triples in size in the town at that time of year and attracts thousands because of the legendary sightings and more recent accounts of the somewhat elusive winged moth-like creature that we call Mothman. Well, I just want to say that is the most fascinating story about Mothman that I have ever heard. And I have to say that I do think from what it sounds like, especially since Mothman was seen flying under the silver disc. And I remember hearing a story about in 1957 when there was actually a sighting of the strange metal disc seen in a wood in West Virginia by a couple of boys. So I do think that there is a connection. And I think it probably is an extraterrestrial origin and may come through those envelopes on the atmosphere of our world. And how it slips in and out of our reality, I do not know. But I think the very fact that people have not been able to kill this elusive creature does suggest that it does have some supernatural abilities. And what it is, I have no idea. But I can't imagine how terrifying it must be to have a sighting of this creature. And if you have, and you've seen it yourself, don't be afraid, because I have heard that a lot of people are still happily around even after having, many years later, after having even sighted this creature. But it does seem that he does seem to be around places of impending disasters. He's seen before them. So that is definitely food for thought. Until next time, goodbye and good night.